Feminism as the new spirit of capitalism, Neoliberal Resignifications. Section 2. As it turned out, the project remained largely stillborn, a casualty of deeper historical forces which were not well understood at the time. With the benefit of hindsight, we can now see that the rise of second wave feminism coincided with a historical shift in the character of capitalism from the state organized variant just discussed to neoliberalism. Reversing the previous formula which sought to use politics to tame markets, proponents of this new form of capitalism proposed to use markets to tame politics. Dismantling key elements of the Bretton Woods framework, they eliminated the capital controls that had enabled Keynesian steering of national economies. In place of dirigisme, they promoted privatization and deregulation. In place of public provision and social citizenship, trickle-down and personal responsibility, In place of welfare and developmental states, the lean, mean competition state. Road tested in Latin America, this approach served to guide much of the transition to capitalism in the East or Central Europe. Although publicly championed by Thatcher and Reagan, it was applied only gradually and unevenly in the First World. In the Third, by contrast, neoliberalization was imposed at the gunpoint of debt. As an enforced program of structural adjustment which overturned all the central tenets of developmentalism and compelled post-colonial states to divest their assets, open their markets, and slash social spending. Interestingly, second wave feminism thrived in these new conditions. What had begun in the context of state-organized capitalism as a radical anti-systematic movement was now en route to becoming a broad-based mass social phenomena. Attracting adherents of every class, ethnicity, nationality, and political ideology, feminist ideas found their way into every nook and cranny of social life and transformed the self-understanding of all whom they touched. The effect was not only vastly to expand the ranks of activists, but also to reshape common sense views of family, work, and dignity. Was it mere coincidence that second wave feminism and neoliberalism prospered in tandem? Or was there some perverse, subterranean, elective affinity between them? That second possibility is heretical, to be sure, but we fail to investigate it at our own peril. Certainly, the rise of neoliberalism dramatically changed the terrain on which second wave feminism operated. The effect, I shall argue here, was to re-signify feminist ideals. Aspirations that had a clear emancipatory thrust in the context of state-organized capitalism assumed a far more ambiguous meaning in the neoliberal era. With welfare and developmental states under attack from free marketeers, feminist critiques of economism, androcentrism, aesthetism, and Westphalianism took on a new balance. Let me clarify this dynamic of resignification by revisiting these four foci of feminist critique. First, feminist anti-economism resignified. Neoliberalism's rise coincided with a major alteration in the political culture of capitalist societies. In this period, claims for justice were increasingly couched as claims for the recognition of identity and difference. With this shift from redistribution to recognition came powerful pressures to transform second wave feminism into a variant of identity politics. A progressive variant, to be sure, but one that tended nevertheless to overextend the critique of culture while downplaying the critique of political economy. In practice, the tendency was to subordinate socio-economic struggles to struggles for recognition, while in the academy, feminist cultural theory began to eclipse feminist social theory. What had begun as a needed corrective to economism devolved in time into an equally one-sided culturalism. Thus, instead of arriving at a broader, rich paradigm that could encompass both redistribution and recognition, second wave feminists effectively traded one truncated paradigm for another. The timing, moreover, could not have been worse. The turn to recognition dovetailed all too neatly with the rising neoliberalism that wanted nothing more than to repress all memory of social egalitarianism. Thus, feminists absolutized the critique of culture at precisely the moment when circumstances required redoubled attention to the critique of political economy. As the critique splintered, moreover, the cultural strand became decoupled not only from the economic strand, but also from the critique of capitalism that had previously integrated them. Unmoored from the critique of capitalism and made available for alternative articulations, these strands could be drawn into what Hester Eisenstein has called a dangerous liaison with neoliberalism. Second, feminist anti-androcentrism resignified. It was only a matter of time, therefore, before neoliberalism resignified in the feminist critique of androcentrism. To explain how, I propose to adapt an argument made by Luke Boltanski and Eve Cepelo. In the important book, The New Spirit of Capitalism, they contend that capitalism periodically remakes itself in moments of historical rupture, in part by recuperating strands of critique directed against it. In such moments, elements of anti-capitalist critique are resignified to legitimate an emergent new form of capitalism, which thereby becomes endowed with the higher moral significance needed to motivate new generations to shoulder the inherently meaningless work of endless accumulation. For Boltanski and Cepelo, the new spirit that has served to legitimate the flexible neoliberal capitalism of our time was fashioned from the new left's artistic critique of state-organized capitalism, which denounced the grey conformism of corporate culture. It was in the accents of May 68, they claim, that neoliberal management theorists propounded a new connectionist project capitalism, in which rigid organizational hierarchies would give way to horizontal teams and flexible networks, thereby liberating individual creativity. The result was a new romance of capitalism with real-world effects, a romance that enveloped the tech startups of Silicon Valley and that today finds its purest expression in the ethos of Google. Boltanski and Chapelow's argument is original and profound. Yet, because it is gender blind, it fails to grasp the full character of the spirit of neoliberal capitalism. To be sure, that spirit includes what I would call a masculinist romance of the free, unencumbered, self-fashioning individual, which they aptly describe. But neoliberal capitalism has as much to do with Walmart, maquiladoras, and microcredit as with Silicon Valley and Google. And its indispensable workers are disproportionately women, not only young single women, but also married women and women with children. Not only racialized women, but women of virtually all nationalities and ethnicities. As such, women have poured into labor markets around the globe. The effect has been to undercut once and for all state-organized capitalism's ideal of family wage. In disorganized neoliberal capitalism, that ideal has been replaced by the newer, more modern norm of the two-earner family. Never mind that the reality that underlies the new ideal is depressed wage levels. Decreased job security, declining living standards, a steep rise in the number of hours worked for wages per household, exacerbation of the double shift, now often a triple or quadruple shift, and a rise in female-headed households. Disorganized capitalism turns a sow's ear into a silk purse by elaborating a new romance of female advancements and gender justice. Disturbing as it may sound, I am suggesting that second-wave feminism has unwittingly provided the key ingredient of the new spirit of neoliberalism. Our critique of the family wage now supplies a good part of the romance that invests flexible capitalism with a higher meaning and a moral point. Endowing their daily struggles with an ethical meaning, the feminist romance attracts women at both ends of the social spectrum. At one end, the female cadres of the professional middle class determined to crack the glass ceiling. At the other end, the female temps, part-timers, low-wage service workers, domestics, sex workers, migrants, EPZ workers, and microcredit borrowers seeking not only income and material security, but also dignity, self-betterment, and liberation from traditional authority. At both ends, the dream of women's emancipation is harnessed due to the critique to the engine of capitalist accumulation. The second-wave feminism's critique of the family wage has enjoyed a perverse afterlife. Once the centerpiece of a radical critique of androcentrism, it serves today to intensify capitalism's valorization of waged labor. Feminist anti-etatism resignified. Neoliberalism has also resignified the anti-etatism of the previous period, making it grist for schemes aimed at reducing state action tout court. In the new climate, it seemed but a short step from second-wave feminism's critique of welfare state, paternalism, to Margaret Thatcher's critique of the nanny state. That was certainly the experience in the United States, where feminists watched helplessly as Bill Clinton triangulated their nuanced critique of a sexist and stigmatizing system of poor relief into a plan to end welfare as we know it, which abolished the federal entitlement to income support. In the post-colonies, Meanwhile, the critique of the developmental state's androcentrism morphed into enthusiasm for NGOs, which emerged everywhere to fill the space vacated by shrinking states. Certainly, the best of these organizations provided urgently needed material aid to populations bereft of public services. Yet, the effect was often to depoliticize the grassroots and to skew the agendas of local groups in directions favored by first world funders. By its very stopgap nature, moreover, NGO action did little to challenge the receding tide of public provision or to build political support for responsive state action. The explosion of microcredit illustrates the dilemma. Counterposing feminist values of empowerment and participation from below to the passivity-inducing red tape of top-down etatism, the architects of these projects have crafted an innovative synthesis of individual, self-help, and community networking. NGO oversight and market mechanisms all aimed at combating women's poverty and gender subjection. The results so far include an impressive record of loan repayments and anecdotal evidence of lives transformed. What has been concealed, however, in the feminist hoopla surrounding these projects is a disturbing coincidence. Microcredit has burgeoned just as states has abandoned macrostructural efforts to fight poverty. Efforts that small-scale lending cannot possibly replace. In this case, too, then, the feminist critique of bureaucratic paternalism has been recuperated by neoliberalism. A perspective aimed originally at transforming state power into a vehicle of citizen empowerment and social justice is now used to legitimate marketization and state retrenchment. Fourth, feminist contra and pro-Westphalianism resignified. Finally, neoliberalism altered for better and for worse second-wave feminism's ambivalent relation to the Westphalian frame. In the new context of globalization, it no longer goes without saying that the bounded territorial state is the sole legitimate container for obligations of and struggles for justice. Thus, feminists have joined environmentalists, human rights activists, and critics of the WTO in challenging that view. Operationalizing post-Westphalian institutions that had remained unactionable and in state organized capitalism, they have targeted trans-border injustices that had been marginalized or neglected in the previous era. Utilizing new communications technologies to establish transnational networks, feminists have pioneered innovative strategies like boomerang effect, which mobilizes global public opinion to spotlight local abuses and to shame the states that condone them. The result was a promising new form of feminist activism, transnational, multi-scalar, post-Westphalian. But the transnational turn brought difficulties too, often stymied at the level of the state. Many feminists directed their energies to the international arena, especially to a succession of UN-related conferences from Nairobi to Vienna to Beijing and beyond. Building a presence in global civil society from which to engage new regimes of global governance, they became entangled in some of the problems I have already noted. For example, campaigns for women's human rights focus overwhelmingly on issues of violence and reproduction, as opposed, for example, to poverty. Ratifying the Cold War split between civil and political rights on the one hand and social and economic rights on the other, these efforts too have privileged recognition over redistribution. In addition, these campaigns intensified the NGOification of feminist politics, widening the gap between professional and grassroots. while according disproportionate voice to English-speaking elites. Analogous dynamics have been operating too. In the feminist engagement with the policy apparatus of European Union, especially given the absence of genuinely transnational, Europe-wide grassroots movements. Thus, the feminist critique of Westphalianism has proved ambivalent in the era of neoliberalism. What began as a salutary attempt to expand the scope of justice beyond the nation state has ended up dovetailing in some respects with the administrative needs of a new form of capitalism. In general, then, the fate of feminism in the neoliberal era presents a paradox. On the one hand, the relatively small countercultural movement of the previous period has expanded exponentially, successfully disseminating its ideas across the globe. On the other hand, feminist ideas have undergone a subtle shift in balance in the altered context. Unambiguously emancipatory in the era of state-organized capitalism, critiques of economism, androcentrism, etatism, and Westphalianism now appear fraught with ambiguity, susceptible to serving the legitimation needs of new form of capitalism. After all, this capitalism would much prefer to confront claims for recognition over claims for redistribution as it builds new regime of accumulation on the cornerstone of women's waged labor and seeks to disembed markets from democratic political regulation in order to operate all the more freely on a global scale.